Hey guys, thanks for watching today's video. So today I'm going to be discussing the results from the New York and Kentucky primaries and how they changed the Democratic Party forever. Before I really dive into it, please make sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment any future videos you'd like to see or any suggestions that you have for my channel, just because I'm just starting out and it'd be really helpful. So let's dive right into it. The first thing that I want to note is that these results are not permanent. Some of the races have been called just because the margins are so large, but a lot of the races are still, there's still potential for the results to change because these are just the ballots that were cast in person. In Kentucky, the ballots from Louisville and Lexington haven't even been counted yet. So I'm really just doing an initial vote count and the implications of that for the Democratic Party. So without further ado, let's start talking about it. The first race that I want to talk about is the 12th Congressional District. So this pits incumbent Carolyn Maloney against Suraj Patel. Now, for this first race, it's really the Progressive Party versus the more centrist establishment party. That is generally going to be the trend for today that we're going to be focusing on, is how progressives have done against moderates. And in this first race, Suraj Patel is probably the least progressive candidate that we're going to be talking about. He wasn't endorsed by Democratic Socialists. He wasn't endorsed by AOC or Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. But he does label himself as a pragmatic progressive, more progressive than Carolyn Maloney is, who is a strong establishment candidate. Suraj Patel, right now, it seems like he is only losing by around 1.5 percentage points, and as absentee ballots roll in, that is definitely subject to change. So I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the 2018 results and the 2018 results, and if we look at 2018, Carolyn Maloney was at around 60% of the vote. Meanwhile, Patel was only breaking 40%. So while Patel is not performing as strongly as he was in 2018, it's because there are two other very strong progressive candidates. Lauren Ashcraft, who is a Democratic Socialist. However, he has been able to build his strength against Maloney. Maloney has significantly less share of the votes that she did. She had 60% in 2018, and now she only has 40%. Suraj did, again, dip a little bit compared to his 2018 poll numbers, but that is most likely because there are two other very progressive candidates in the field right now. This is definitely a good sign for the progressive movement. Of course, Suraj is not a true progressive candidate. However, he is more progressive than the establishment, so this is sort of the first sign that the progressive wing of the party is growing in power. So the next race that I want to talk about is AOC's primary race, where she was facing off against this candidate, Michelle Caruso Cabrera. Now, Cabrera was actually a pretty strong fundraiser, considering that she was going up against Alexandria Cortez. However, we can see from the polling numbers, even though absentee ballots haven't even been sent in, the race has already been called for AOC just because her lead is so large. So this is another really good sign for the Progressive Party. It shows that once a progressive incumbent wins in the district, if you look back to the 2018 results, this district, AOC did win by a pretty large margin. It seems around 15 points. However, if we flip back here, this is, a 50-point margin. So she was able to grow her lead a lot now that she has the name recognition in the district and the money to fund a proper campaign. It looks like AOC and the progressives are going to be pretty strong once they're in office. The main barrier for them is going to be going up against the House caucus and the Senate caucus that are funding these, more centrist establishment candidates. Now we're going to talk about the 15th Congressional District, and this is a really interesting race. And this saw Ruben Diaz, who was actually leading in a few polls going into the election. He is definitely more of a conservative. He has a history of homophobic comments. He is said to have some racist comments. He is a state senator, and he had large name recognition in the district. However, at the end of the day, it seems that Richie Torres was able to win. This was a really interesting race just because Ruben Diaz, who was such an eccentric and problematic candidate, quite frankly, he was doing pretty well in the polls, but it seems like now that election night has happened, Richie Torres is going to take it. I mean, anything could happen as absentee ballots roll in, but it would be pretty hard to make up a 15-point difference. The candidate that I want to talk about is Samalise Lopez. She was the candidate who was endorsed by AOC and the Democratic Socialists. And she didn't have a very strong showing today. She wasn't able to fundraise quite as well, and she didn't have the name recognition in the district that people like Richie Torres and Ruben Diaz and Michael Blake had. However, she did get these large endorsements, so this is probably one of the worst showings for the progressives. However, Richie Torres is more of a progressive candidate than a lot of the establishment candidates that we'll be talking today, so it's not a complete loss for the progressives. However, their backed candidate, Samalise, she did not do extremely well. So that isn't a good sign. It shows that even in an extremely Democratic district, that they don't do extremely well, which is pretty interesting. This is one that is very strong for the progressives. It saw Jamal Bowman against Elliot Engel. Engel was a long-time incumbent, and he is probably about as establishment as they get. He was pretty close to someone like Joe Crowley in 2018 or Nancy Pelosi now. Very establishment candidate. The House caucus really threw their support behind him because they knew that he was going to face a pretty spirited primary challenge. Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and even Hillary Clinton kind of at the end there went and endorsed Elliot Engel, and then Bernie Sanders endorsed Jamal, and so did Elizabeth Warren right after Hillary Clinton endorsed Elliot. And so if we look at the 2018 results in this district, we see that Elliot did extremely well. He did exceptionally well, winning over 70% of the vote. He didn't really face a significant primary challenge from anybody else. I mean, the highest vote share was 16%, and that isn't coming even close to beating him. So when we come back here, we see that a 60% lead from the progressive candidate is definitely a drastic change, and it shows that the country is moving more progressive. It's trending in the progressive direction. And we can talk about that a little bit more, why that is happening in the Kentucky primary. Now we're just going to talk about the last New York progressive is Mondaire Jones. He's filling in a seat that is likely to go to the Democratic Party in 2020. Adam Schleifer is a self-funder. He spent over $4 million on this race. Mondaire Jones was also able to raise quite a bit of money, but not as much as Adam Schleifer. And this is a really historic race because of Mondaire Jones, he will likely go on to be the first African-American openly gay congressman, which would be just a really kind of groundbreaking thing. So that's a really big deal. Adam Schleifer doesn't even seem to be close. Again, as these absentee ballots come in, it's not clear which way that they're going to lean, if they're going to go more progressive or if they're going to break for the establishment candidates. However, it does seem that Mondaire has the strong lead going into that. So now we're going to move over to Kentucky, and that is going to be the last thing that we're going to talk about is the Kentucky results for the Senate. So this saw Amy McGrath facing against Charles Booker. Amy McGrath going into this was really her primary to lose. She was endorsed by the Senate caucus for the Democratic Party, and when you're endorsed by the Senate caucus, it kind of means that you're not going to lose. You're getting the funding from the Senate, and you are the clear favorite. You have the press, you have the notoriety, you have the name recognition. So again, it's really your Senate campaign to lose. And Charles Booker, who is a very strong progressive from one of the poorest districts in Louisville, he represents them in the state Senate. He definitely was not having a lot of name recognition going into it. However, with the tragic murder of Breonna Taylor, paired with the tragic murder of George Floyd, there has been a very large growing sentiment for drastic change to the police force in the Black Lives Matter movement. Charles Booker actually represents Louisville, which is where Breonna Taylor was murdered. So there has been a lot of energy coming out of Louisville. There was a lot of protests going on, and as those protests going on, Charles Booker was actually on the front lines in these protests, getting tear gassed, and so he gained a lot of press from that. He gained a lot of notoriety from that as people sort of saw him and recognized that we do need change, and so they saw that Charles Booker was the candidate of change. Amy McGrath was not at any of these protests. She was staying at home with her family, like she said. Amy McGrath was definitely seen as a candidate of inaction, whereas Charles Booker was seen as a candidate of change. Charles Booker supports the Green New Deal, and he supports Medicare for all. So the fact that he would be able to come so close in a state like Kentucky is really crazy, actually. So if we look at this and we take a look at the size of the lead, Lexington just finally reported their results. However, Louisville has not reported their results yet. So if they do today, I will make sure to add that onto the video. So Louisville is definitely expected to be the area where Charles Booker is the most strong. He is expected to run up a very significant margin in the city of Louisville, which has over 600,000 residents. So the fact that he is able to come this close in just the rest of Kentucky, he was actually coming pretty close, even when Lexington's results were not in. This is a pretty good sign for the Booker campaign. And we'll take a look back at these size of leads. So Amy McGrath, her strength really came outside in some of these suburbs, but it really came from western and eastern Kentucky in some of these districts that are bordering Ohio or Indiana. So overall, I would argue that this primary cycle was very strong for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And we saw a lot of progressive candidates do exceptionally well, much better than they were able to do in 2018. This really comes out of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the need for systemic change to the police forces. As the progressive wing of the party grows, it will be really interesting to see how the Democratic Party fares with that, how the establishment moderate candidates balance the growing progressive wing and the power that progressives have in the House and in the Senate. Now, just the fact that Charles Booker was able to put up such a strong challenge against a candidate that was backed by the Senate caucus, this is really telling, and it really shows that going forward, the Democratic Party might definitely have some trouble controlling their candidates. If they're not able to ensure that the candidates that they pick to run are able to win very easily, then their power will be significantly diminished. Also, as the progressive wing of the party grows, the Democratic Party platform will change drastically, and that will change how people perceive the Democratic Party on a national level. So all of this will be really interesting to see how it affects going forward. I definitely think that this primary showed that the progressive wing is here, and it is strong, and it is not necessarily a force to be reckoned with. If it was just in New York, it'd be one thing, a few House seats. However, a Senate seat in Kentucky is a really big deal. Kentucky, one of the most Republican states in the country, for a progressive to do this well is shocking. So this is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you guys later.